All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Liberalish podcast. This is episode 26. I wanted to give a special shout out to my lovely co-host. We got the lovely, the beautiful, the intelligent Carly over here. We got the original co-host here, Marcus. Shout out to you. So I'm working on your interest, man. I'm working on your interest. And Ryan, he can't make it here today. Hopefully he'll be with us next week. And producer Yao is claiming he has another job that's more important than this one. So his job,
get him out of here.
He might get fired, man. I don't know. We'll see.
He's on probation right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's on probation, man. He hasn't actually been with the pod for like a while, actually. So
yeah.
Well, whatever. Screw that guy. Anyways, all right. Well, I didn't want to start off the pod this way, but it's been like a really rough week since the last time we met. There's been like a lot of bad news that's occurred. So like what I wanted to do, I just wanted to get the bad news out in the beginning, get it over with, so that then we could go on to talk about like some fun stuff, so like normal everyday politics. If you are someone that doesn't like to hear bad news, I suggest probably hitting that skip button and skip ahead a little bit. Or just go look at our timestamps.
I was gonna say there will be timestamps. So.
There will be timestamps, so you can do that. But all right, it's been a rough week. All right, so let's kind of go down what happened here. There's been a couple of mass shootings. There was one in Indianapolis at a Fedex facility. At the time, it was the 45th mass shooting since March 16th. What really kind of makes this like even more fucked up was the FedEx employees, they have a policy where they have to lock their phones up in their lockers. So when the gunman was in the building, they couldn't call 911. So just think about that. That's the reason why like there's been like a big union push. So that's really kind of think about that.
Honestly, I never because I feel like my jobs, like my retail jobs were like that. Like we weren't allowed to have our phones. And I never stopped to think about if I were ever in that type of situation. So I think like more people should realize like phones I think a lot of people think if you have your phone, like you'll use your phone, you won't be as productive. But I think to have people lock up their phones, even in school, especially like the way mass shootings keep, happening, I hope more people will look at like situations like this and realize like that's not necessarily the best idea.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. And like you said, unfortunately, it's getting like so commonplace. I mean, I think even today I saw the news that Austin had like a mass shooting event.
Yeah.
So it's just becoming really, really commonplace now. So like you said, Carly, we just gotta like, because Congress isn't going to do anything about it. So you might as well just get used to it.
Mm-hmm.
Also, wild these are all popping up just as soon as places start opening up. The number of shootings. It's one of the more discouraging things. I think about that old that Dave Chappelle joke that he made that we needed COVID to kind of protect us from murderous whites. It's kind of it's funny, but it's also sad because it's true, because we didn't have these issues last year when when people weren't going to schools and people weren't gathering, and the opportunities for mass shootings really weren't there. And now, unfortunately, they are, and we're kind of powerless to do anything about them.
I think white people were very quick to counter and said that the person that threatened our queen Kamala Harris was a Black woman. So I think that'd be like a very quick counter to that.
Yeah, which is just beyond ridiculous. But I think was that in Florida.
Yeah.
I'm just saying it seems like the rules changed down there, so that's a very Florida thing.
That's
Florida just seems to supersede race and when it comes to just bizarre things happening. Anything goes down there.
Anything goes down here. And I did want to let the listeners know I am planning to escape Florida this summer, so I am going to save myself, guys. All right, so moving along this really depressing list here. So Chicago police released a body cam footage of an officer shooting a 13-year-old boy. I didn't watch it. I didn't even look at the comments. They're saying he had a gun in him, but he tossed it the last second, turned around, both hands were up in the air. Cops still shot him dead. And Chicago tried to bury it. Prosecutor tried to bury it. How the hell do you expect us to believe and trust the police if you're not even being transparent?
Yeah.
So Hope they finally get justice, man. So thoughts and prayers out to that family. It's a 13-year-old kid. They're gonna do stupid things. All right, so Minneapolis or Minnesota State Police were mistreating the press. So basically, they round up the journalists who are covering the protests, forced them on the ground, and took pictures of their faces. Basically, it was kind of like sound like a socialist country almost, but that's what they were doing. Look, if I'll go off a little tangent here. If I'm Trump and I'm sitting in Mar-a-Lago, I'm saying like, you all criticize me for my DC response, but look what happened here in Minnesota, how you guys treated the press yet again. Like this shit is still happening again, and I'm not even the president. So,
yeah.
So I just thought that was kind of interesting. All right, Daunte Wright. Obviously, his shooting I think happened right after we recorded our last pod. So basically, again, another unarmed Black kid running away from police. Cop claims that she had a taser, shot him with the 9. She's a 26-year veteran of the force. She's a union president. She's a trainee or trainer for other officers. So I don't know. I was raised in a military family. I hold people to a higher standard. Apparently, cops are held to a lower standard. So we'll see how that case goes. Go ahead.
I think like earlier in the earlier episodes when we were talking about like defunding the police, I was saying like, you know, a big part of defunding the police is like allocating funds. But like, as I've really taken like a deep dive on police reform, criminal justice reform, I realized that it's like when you say defund the police, that's like you have to defund and defunk the police. Like there's no reforming the system that we have now. I wholeheartedly believe there's no reform for the system that we have in place now. I don't think you can fix it. I don't think any amount of sensitivity training, racial training, you know, even this whole situation, I don't even think if they had like trainings for like how to engage your weapon or, you know, whatever. I don't think it's a problem with the system, in my opinion. I think the system is working exactly how it's supposed to work. And so right. I think we would have to kind of strip the whole system and kind of start anew, because this, you know, I was just having this conversation with somebody. We have these conversations about like, what can we do? What can change? How can we go about change? But I don't think there's any change that can come from this. I think it just has to be a completely new system, because you have people who are racist and sign up to become a cop because it allows them to be legally racist and you know, because I think it's not a coincidence that all these situations keep happening, if you get what I'm saying. Like, I don't think it's an accident. I don't think it's, oh, I fear for my life, because that's something you knew was going to come. Like, I don't feel like you should be able to cry like, oh, I fear for my life every single time, because I feel like that's a part of your job. You have to work through that. You kind of
signed up for it.
Yeah, you do. So, you know, it's just unfortunate. And again, I'm sad to say, like, you know, even like to talk about it, another person, especially because it's happening. And then we're also dealing with the Derek Chauvin case at the same time. So it's kind of like, it's so, you know, it's just so crazy how this whole situation happened like a year ago, and you saw how that played out. And then in the midst of a trial for what's happened last year, we're dealing with a similar, not in nature, like as far as the crime or what, not the crime or whatever they stopped him for, but just the fact that, you know, it could have just been a simple traffic stop and he should have been able to go home.
I 100% agree. And like, just like a little like story, very quick story. When my parents were stationed in Long Island, I used to go pay them a visit. I was at the barber shop and this NYPD officer comes in. Everyone's Black, right? NYPD officer comes in and everyone's joking around of like, oh man, are you gonna run after people? And he's like, hell no. If you get away from me, I'm going to find you. I'm not going to chase after you. I'm going to find you. And I've always kind of like held it. I know he was like joking, but it's just like, yeah, the kid was in the car. You have the license plate. You have all the information. You could probably could have just tracked him down and like located him, you know, afterwards, right? It didn't have to go down that way. And that's something I always like thought about it. You don't have to get the arrest right then and there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can just wait. But it did this shooting did call into question basically like pretext laws, where you have like these weird laws on the books. So it's like your tint can't be a certain color. Basically, tint can't be too dark. You can't hang like air fresheners in your windows.
And I just said that last week. I literally just talked about that last week and saying how like I used to get pulled over for bullshit. And so it's like shit like that, even if it is a violation, like that's a ticket at most. I don't understand how traffic stops turn into like full on you feeling the need to like use your weapon, if you get what I'm saying. Like, why can't you just write somebody a ticket, whether they want to fight it in court or pay the fine or whatever? Like, why does it have to turn into, and I guess that's where I understand, because I'm not saying like people don't do shit on the road that will require them to get a ticket. Like I've done shit that I'm like, okay, yeah, I can understand why I got pulled over and I got a ticket for this. But it's like, just write the ticket, let them deal with it, you know, how they're going to deal with it, whether they pay it or not. Why do you feel the need to turn it into, or why does it turn into? So that's for me, the thing that I don't understand about this. I don't understand the escalation of the situation and how it escalated so quickly.
Yeah, so that's actually a good point that you brought up. And I think the reason for that is you can actually blame the US Supreme Court for it. And
I
there
knew
was
somebody was to blame.
Yeah, the Supreme Court is actually up until like rather recently, like very recently, the Supreme Court, whenever a case involving the police and like an abuse of power went up to the Supreme Court always sided with the police. So that's why how you got qualified immunity. That's actually a Supreme Court ruling. And these pretext laws where like you get pulled over for like an air freshener, but then a cop can like search your vehicle, all that other good stuff. Supreme Court kind of ruled that as being okay. So like it kind of calls into the question, like, you know, why is the Supreme Court okay of like reducing our civil liberties when it comes to police? And I think that's like a very serious question to ask that institution. All right, we're almost done. We're halfway through. All right, so I don't know if you guys saw like the mayor's press conference at the Brooklyn Center. It was terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
That was one of the worst press conferences I've ever seen in my life. I don't know. Homie just looked like he forgot he had a press conference scheduled. And like he was like, I got notes, I got this. And he just like ran in front of the cameras. It was just a complete and utter disaster. So shout out to the Brooklyn Center mayor. There's a story I just read about right before we potted about like 3 black men in South Carolina. These white guys at Myrtle Beach was like hurling racial slurs. They threw something at them. They fired a weapon at them. One of the black guys fired back in self-defense, struck one of the people. I think all 3 of them are in jail for attempted murder, even though I think South Carolina is a stand your ground state. So we'll keep that in the news. Hopefully, like they get out of it. Fingers crossed. Tamir Rice's mom is asking Merrick Garland to reopen investigation into her son's death. The police chief in the town that harassed that army lieutenant said that no apology is owed, even though he fired the cop that harassed the lieutenant. And Kyle Rittenhouse, I don't know if you remember that white thug in Kenosha in Wisconsin who was carrying that long rifle, killed a couple people. Police are donating to his defense fund. So
that's like the least surprising news.
That
they would be supporting him.
Yeah, and he's not even a cop.
No.
All right, so let's shift the gears a little bit. So we did mention before, like, so the Derek Chauvin case is concluded. The jury is deliberating.
Yeah.
Do we think we're going to see Chauvin in jail the next couple of weeks?
I think. I know I said previously I didn't have a lot of faith, but just as I've been watching the trial, like in bits and pieces, I really feel like the prosecution did a very poor job. And I think I want to believe that the jury, like, I want to say that they realize that they have to take this seriously. I think they kind of understand, but then again, we've said this about the past. If I had to go off like, you know, just my gut feeling, I think that we'll get a conviction. That's kind of how I feel about it. Cause I just kind of, again, like I said last week, I thought the people that would kind of be great witnesses for the prosecution, they actually kind of surprised me, because you had like police officers and, you know, the police, I think it was like the police chief or something, that were basically kind of saying, I don't really understand why this happened, which is unseen, because usually they kind of stick up for each other.
So you're saying the prosecution did a good job?
No, I'm sorry, the defense. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I'm thinking, because I'm sorry,
right.
the defense. I think the defense did a very poor job, because I think the prosecution kind of lined up their witnesses the way that they should have. And I think their witnesses really helped their case, which is what, you know, that's the intention. So I believe that I think I'll see a different outcome. How long he'll go to prison, I'm not, if he goes to prison, I'm not confident on, because, you know, police tend to get, you know, I don't know how that works. I know like sometimes they don't get sentenced like other people. They're kind of, they get a pass, but I think people are starting, I think they realize the role, and I think this is such a big, highly anticipated like outcome. I would have to really say whoever's on the jury is just a complete racist.
All it takes is one, though.
Yeah, I understand that. And that's what I'm saying. Like, I think you have to be like a complete racist to let this go any other way, because there was no reason for this. And for you to have police officers saying that this was grotesque, because, you know, countless times they watch shit happen and they don't do anything about it, or they still make excuses. So I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm hopeful. But then again, that doesn't really mean anything.
Yeah, this is a layup. And I think that the closing arguments today really kind of made that point clear. Like, it really, we saw throughout the trial that the evidence that the prosecution, the argument that they put forth was more than enough to kind of to put someone behind bars. I think a lot of us, if you saw that video, it was really hard to find any sort of justification for Derek Chauvin, for Officer Chauvin, what he did for committing this murder. And I think the prosecution really, in the last, I say the response to the defense's closing arguments, I thought did a really good job of just kind of hammering home the point that, you know, what he did was a totally unreasonable response. He was totally acting out of line, and he committed murder. And I think that, you know, this is a layup for them. And if they somehow miss this, or if somehow the jury just can't get past, you know, their own feelings on police or racism or whatever to get this done, it's a real shame. But this should be the easiest trial,
which is not your job,
for a jury to figure out.
That's not your job. That's another thing. Like, you doing jury duty is not your time to take your own personal feelings. It's like that's what the whole point of jury selection is. It's to wean out like people who have biases or whatever. It's like, just show up, listen to the evidence as it's presented to you, and go off that. Like, that's why I say, I think you have to be like a real racist, and you have to genuinely hate Black people for you to see it any other way, because there were so many other things that they could have done. First of all, this whole situation could have been avoided because it just wasn't necessary. Like, this is all over supposedly a counterfeit $20 bill. Like, that
didn't even go back to investigate that part.
It didn't, that has like, I just don't understand. Exactly. I don't understand how a small thing can escalate so quickly and turn into like someone dying. If you felt like he stole the $20, like, you could have arrested him. He could have went to jail, had his day in court, whatever, blah, blah, blah. I don't understand why that man didn't get to go home to his family that night. So that's what I'm saying. Like, anybody with a brain, and anybody who has like any sort of, you know, just decency for another human being or human life would realize like this was a murder. This wasn't a police who was doing his job. This wasn't a police officer who was fearful of his life. So he, you know, whatever, which I feel like we have to stop using that as an excuse, because what are you really scared of? That's another thing that we have to tackle. But like I said, I personally think it is going to be the way I think it's going to go.
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed that this asshole goes to jail for like a long time.
Yeah.
So, and I'll just say this, you know, I think a couple years ago, Minnesota had a case. I think Minneapolis PD had a case where a Black police officer shot and killed an unarmed white woman, and he's in jail for like 12 plus years, I believe. Open and shut case.
Of course.
So it happens. That's all I'm going to say. It happens. But when the roles are reversed, now we got to go into the nuances of everything. And I'm going to say it happens. So we'll just go off of that. All All right, so our favorite aunt, Auntie Maxine Waters, she's in Brooklyn Center. She was trying to rile up a crowd, and she told the crowd to get more confrontational if Derek Chauvin is found not guilty in the death of George Floyd. So basically, she's obviously getting a lot of pushback from this. House Minority Leader wants to move to censor her in the House. Chauvin's attorney wanted to rule a mistrial. And what was really shocking, we were talking about this in pre-production, the judge was actually entertaining it. Like, he was seriously considering overturning the case due to her comments. And we were just kind of asking, how does that impact the comments? Because like, if you look outside the courtroom, it's a militarized zone. Doesn't that like impact like the jury's decision? Like, the jury knows that there's an angry crowd outside.
Yeah.
Shouldn't that impact it? So it was just kind of shocking that like one politician's comments, they were going to use that to overturn the case.
It's also a double standard, because if it was a white male that had something to say about it, it would just been taken as, oh, like they're just voicing their opinion or they're just sharing their thoughts. But that's the point. I'm saying it's a double standard. Like, even the cop that you were just referring to, when it's us, it's a completely different thing. It's like, you never hear the end of it. But when the roles are reversed, it's always an excuse. And I feel like, yeah. No,
I was going to say, no, we have the example of Donald Trump, with the Central Park 5,
yeah,
which is, the perfect example of someone, using their position, using their, notoriety to kind of bring attention to a case where to an already controversial case.
And that had an impact on the case. Yeah. Like, they talk about this to this day. Donald Trump's whole escapade and him taking out full-page ads about it had something to do with the outcome of the case. And yet this man went on to become the president of the United States. So, if there's no consequences, so it's like, there's no consequences when they do what they do, because it's like they feel so passionately about it. They're using their voice to share how they feel. They're starting a conversation. But when it's us, it's like, you can't say stuff like that. That's, so I think it's unfair, but I think a part of the world we live in today is acknowledging like patterns and things that you see and realizing that it's all a part of a greater system that is just working how it's supposed to work. Like,
right, 100%. And like, here's another example of it, right? So when we complain or we call some injustices, we usually get like symbolic gestures, right? Yeah. We get like Black Lives Matter Boulevard, we get like MLK Road or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't really get actual real change, right? At least not anymore. Let's just say that, at least not anymore. And when we do something like impact the system way it's not supposed to, like, for example, vote in great numbers, you see how states respond back in such like a negative way towards us. And a prime example would be like here in Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis just signed a bill where, like, if you're out protesting, if all three of us are out protesting and it's peaceful, if one person, not even in our group, starts like acting violently, all three of us could be charged with a felony. So that's basically made like protesting illegal if you're Black, essentially, because we know like if there's going to be like a Blue Lives Matter rally, this rule is not going to be applied. We know that. But like he did this in preparation for the Derek Chauvin case, a case like he gets acquitted. He pretty much makes protesting illegal. So that's just another clear example of how like the system continuously works against Black people in this way.
Of course.
Yeah.
All right, so that takes care of the bad news segment. Like I said, that was a rough week. It's been a while since I experienced like a week in the news that's been that rough. So to try and like help mitigate that segment, I found some good news to talk about. All right, so the first bit of good news is that the House committee voted last Wednesday to recommend for the first time the creation of a commission to consider Black Americans receive reparations. So the bill is going to be called HR 40, which is basically named after the 40 acres and a mule promise that President Lincoln made. President Joe Biden has stated that he's tackling racial inequality the center of his domestic agenda. So I have a question here for the podcast. What does reparations look like in the United States? Hypothetical. If we got it, what does it look like?
I think it would be education. Are you
So
asking
each-
are you asking what my idea of reparations would look like, or like what we think reparations should be, or is that the question?
I
think
that's a good follow-up question. I think you can take it
Okay.
however way you
So,
want it.
in my opinion, I feel like reparations has to be equivalent to anything that would give, because when you're talking about reparations, I think the position in which most Black American families are in is a direct link from slavery. So I think reparations should look like anything that gives Black people more opportunity at real success and wealth in this country. I don't really know if we'll ever have true wealth, like, like generations of white people have, because we're so far behind the curve. But I think it should definitely be monetary, in the form of monthly payments. Like, keep paying me because it's been long enough. These reparations should have been rolled out like decades ago. I think it should be free education. I think Black descendants of Black slaves should be able to go to college for free. I think it should be monetary, and I think there should be, like different programs that only are available to Black people, such as like home buying, owning property, stuff like that, financial literacy, all those type of things.
Yeah, I think that you really do have to tackle those kind of areas where the state clearly influenced things in a negatively for Black people, whether it's home ownership, whether it's access to college, whether it's access to banking and financial support in order to start businesses and kind of build their own communities. I think that those are the areas where reparations, when it's not like Joe mentioned in a minute, but it has to be targeted towards those things. And I would think that any program should start with alleviating the student loan debt burden for Black people, because I think that we have kind of bought into this belief, our community has bought into this belief that if you go to school, that's going to be kind of your path path into the middle class, path into a better way of life. But what a lot of us are finding is that we are underemployed still. We are, or the idea that we have more education than we need for the jobs that we're getting.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the things that needs to be tackled, because if you're underemployed, guess what? It's a lot harder to pay those very expensive tuition bills that you racked up in order to kind of move into a better way of life. So I think that has to be addressed. I think that some form of direct transfer payments that can, this is the one I really think of, because I think community investment is a big part of it. There's no reason that historically Black areas that have been underinvested in for years, and that's kind of has a trickle down to our schools and our hospitals and things like that. So money needs to be put into those areas in some way, shape, or form, whether it's direct transfer payments right into people's pockets, or just just allotting more money to those cities and those states that have been negatively influenced by this stuff. Whichever way works best. Direct payments may work better, is because people are more likely to spend that money. Whereas with states, the money can get a little dicey. You can have contractors who want to steal it, and just won't fix the problem. But it's going to take a large form of investment, and just to kind of make these things right, because again, Black people have had the short end of the stick since they got here.
Yeah.
And not enough has been done to kind of correct that. But I do wonder though, like one of the things that I am curious about, I think Kev, you wrote down the question somewhere, but who's actually going to receive these reparations? Is it going to be anybody who's Black? Is it going to be
Right.
And that's what we have to. I think that's important. I think
it
it
has
should
to be figured out.
I think it should be direct. I think it should be direct descendants of slaves. I don't want to hear, especially now, no offense, especially now with like you have ancestry, like testing and DNA testing, and like everyone's finding out their roots. I don't want to hear, oh, I'm 15% Black, I need to get a check, or, my
they'll be there though.
There's gonna be a lot, yeah.
I think I have great grandparents who are Black, so I think it should be people who are direct descendants of slaves. And I know that might be difficult to trace back, but I think everybody has to stop benefit. Like, if reparations were to be a thing, I don't really think it's the least that we deserve, and it's something that we should have gotten a long time ago, especially because we're the ones that are impacted the most. And so I think sometimes when it comes to Black culture and it comes to being Black and like when it comes down to being Black when it's positive, everybody wants to be Black. But when it's time to be Black in ways that it's not, that negatively impacts you, all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm not Black. So I want it to be the exact same thing. Like, if you're not Black any other time, you don't deserve a check.
So let me ask a question at the top of that, right? So producer Yao, who we just shitted on earlier on the podcast, he actually arrived. So he wants to chime in. So
Okay.
Yao, go ahead, unmute yourself, chime in.
Yeah, this is Yao here. So I just had a question. So as an African, so like my family's from Ghana, but in US, every time I fill out a form, I put down Black because that's the only option, right? Do you think this is a two-part question. Do you think there's mechanisms in place for the government to know who deserves a check? Number two, do you think people who have found their way in US successfully deserve a check? So like, to someone who is running like a multi-million-dollar company and who is very well off, like top 10%, get a check over someone like who is like maybe 50% Black or something,
well,
who is not doing well.
Being that the government can tell you, like, being that the government has magnificent ways to finding out specific information, I believe that if it really came down to it, yes, they could. Because they're able to find out any other stuff that they want if they really wanted to. So it's like, put in the work and figure it out. Two, I don't think just because you're successful or you've created a success for yourself that you don't, like, you should be disqualified from receiving a check, because those are things that you had to accomplish on your own despite the odds. Like, it's not like things worked in your favor every single time, or it wasn't hard work, or you were like, you don't have a privilege that got you where you are. Like, you got to where you are because of like your own merit and things that you had to do. So I don't feel like that has anything to do with reparations, because that doesn't negate the fact that you would still be a descendant of a slave.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. I think you make that money available to anyone, regardless of where they got. I think that you can consider it, just like an apology.
Exactly, that's what it
like,
is.
you had to work much harder than you would have had to if you were white. So in order to make up for that, here, maybe it's not. And I know that's going to be. I could totally see that being one of the arguments that muddies the debate on reparations, but I think that just across the board, everyone who is eligible, and I have no idea what that criteria will be, whether it's is it just people that were descendants of slaves, or West Indians who have to kind of deal with the fallout, or people who emigrate from Africa, like, do they have to deal with the fallout from being Black, even though they're not descendants of slaves? I think they should all take part in that, and I think that's. Whether or not you made your money or not, or are successful, you should still kind of take part in reparations, because you have to deal with the fallout from being Black in this country, regardless of your origin. So that should not be a hang up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm voting for both of you guys then. All right, so we got some more good news here. So we're talking really poorly about the police, rightfully so. But Maryland, shout out to Maryland. They just passed a police reform bill. And what this bill does is that it limits the police's officers' use of force, restricts the use of no-knock warrants, and repeals their Bill of Rights for law enforcement. So this is like the most far-reaching police reform bill, I think, anywhere in the nation. So big shout out to Maryland. Their legislature overturned a veto from the governor. So really big shout out to that state. They're doing some good work over there.
Yeah, very good work.
All right. Here's the best news of them all. All right, Matthew McConaughey. You may have known him from his Lincoln commercials. You may have known him from True Detective, from the only greatest season ever, season 1. Every other season sucked. But Matthew McConaughey, he holds a 12-point lead over Governor Greg Abbott in a hypothetical gubernational race. Could a Governor McConaughey work?
I don't see why not. Honestly, we just had a celebrity president, so I don't see why. I think we're now living in a times where we're kind of removing ourselves, which is, I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I want to say, based off previous experiences, it's not necessarily a good thing. I think people are starting to remove themselves from the idea that a politician or someone who holds office has to be the traditional politician, like someone who's dedicated a life to, service, or has held previous like political jobs and stuff, and just kind of work themselves up. I think people are gravitating towards different ideas. And I mean, Matthew McConaughey he's an attractive guy.
Wow.
He's had
Marcus, do you hear this?
I did not expect this answer to go in this direction, but I'm here for it.
He's an attractive guy. He's done really great in his career. I don't know him personally. I don't know if he's a likable guy, but he has the southern charm thing going for him. So it might work out. I don't see if you're telling me that he has people that are looking to vote for him, I don't see why he wouldn't, if he keeps the momentum going, I don't see why he wouldn't, have a real shot at it if he took it seriously and really went out on the campaign trail and like really push people to vote for him. I don't see why not, honestly.
I mean, I wasn't expecting Mr. McConaughey to be the guy that they're going to for this race. I would have expected Beto O'Rourke or somebody like that. So the fact that they pulled him out, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that he holds the lead, because he's more popular, especially Abbott's coming off of a terrible year in Texas where he reopened the state early and they just totally mishandled that snowstorm that they had.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me that people are like, maybe fed up with the guy. But man, another celebrity, and it's happened before. Shout out to California; they've already given us a couple of celebrity governors. There's no reason that it can't happen, but if you want to turn over, Texas, which I think is one of the largest economies in the country.
He's from Texas too.
He is. He's from Texas. Went to the University of Texas, Austin. He's a big Longhorns fan.
Yes.
Seems like a good guy, which matters in places like that. Like it's like, oh, I definitely have a beer with Matthew McConaughey, which could definitely work. But man, I don't know if you want to turn over Texas, as big as it is, as many things that's
honestly,
as much as what goes on there. I don't know if you want to turn it over to him, but
yeah,
could be worse. I mean, Wendy Davis was ran against Abbott last time. She didn't do so hot. Who knows if Beto would do it, but maybe it's worth it. I don't know.
Honestly, if I lived in Texas and like Beyonce or Megan Thee Stallion decided they wanted to run for governor, I can't honestly say I wouldn't vote for them. So I can't even.
Megan Thee Stallion for governor.
So I can't even.
I got Beyonce, but Meg Thee Stallion.
The hot girl coach, of course. Why wouldn't I? So I think a lot of people are trying to find more likable people to vote for because the climate of politics at this time is you kind of like. We see it all the time. Like people say what they want to say to get you to vote for them because that's what they do. They're politicians. That's like that's what they're used to. So I think a lot of people are having this idea that if we have non-traditional people run for office, that it might be a different, might change things up. And it might, I don't know if, I really don't know Matthew McConaughey's character per se, but he's from Texas. He's had some blockbuster hits. I know I used to watch How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days on like repeat when I was a kid. So it might work out. I wasn't expecting it though. No, for sure. I didn't expect him to be on the ballot.
It would be really funny to see Fox News every night just railing against Megan Thee Stallion running for governor, talking about, look at her videos. Yes. She was in WAP. Did you see what she did?
I was actually,
they have a whole thing. Like people have been reporting to like the FCC about her like Grammy performance. So I definitely see that happening if that were the case. But
those people,
I think if you have a likable person that's a different pace from what you're used to, I don't understand why. I can 100% understand why somebody would think, because I think that was what people thought with Trump. I mean, granted, the people who voted for him didn't see past the bullshit, but I think that was a lot of people's reasonings for voting for Trump because he's not the traditional politician. So it was like, he's not going to feed us the same lies that other politicians do. And it's like, joke's on you.
Yeah, I think outsiders do really well in presidential elections when it's, both a clean slate for both parties. Mm-hmm. Historically, especially since the 60s, I want to say, whenever it's a new or outsider, with the exception of maybe like Nixon and I guess the Bush one, those guys usually do well because it's like, oh, he's an outsider, he's not from Washington. Mm-hmm. Biden really kind of broke Biden, I guess even Obama before him kind of broke that up.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, so speaking of Biden, let's talk about his house and what's been going on inside his house. So President Biden made a pretty big announcement that he's going to do a full withdrawal of troops out of Afghanistan on 9/11. I thought the date was a little bit questionable, but hey, I'm a huge supporter of taking troops out of wars.
Yeah.
So some senators have already voiced their concern about the decisions. Obviously, pretty much all Republicans are against it. Senator Jean Shaheen from Democrat out of New Hampshire, she's been like the most vocal Democrat against it. I did a little research on her. Defense contractors are one of her biggest contributors. Surprise, surprise, why she's so against it. And as person, surprisingly, President Trump came out and really supported this decision too. So I was pretty shocked by that.
He did campaign originally in 2016 on getting us out of foreign wars. So I don't know, maybe it's he's going back on his own ways now that he's in exile.
That was honestly like that was probably the one thing, literally the one thing that I supported Trump on was like ending the forever wars.
Yeah, I think it's about time.
Yeah, because let's say we spent $5 trillion in Afghanistan. I'm just throwing out a random number there. For 20 years that we've been there.
Yeah.
The only thing that we can say is that little girls were able to go to school. That's it.
Right. Mm-hmm.
The Taliban's still there. The Taliban's probably still going to take over the moment we leave. Can you imagine like if we propose a $5 trillion bill over 20 years to help improve the U.S. education system?
Yeah, I don't think our involvement is necessary anymore.
You know,
honestly.
Yeah.
So I'm not a big believer in a war unless it's absolutely necessary, and
honestly, it's never really necessary. I think if we look at the history of like wars that America has gotten themselves into, a lot of it has just been like complete like bullshit, like just for no reason. Like we either involve ourselves in shit that has nothing to do with us, or it's under false pretenses. Like, you know, the whole weapons of mass destruction thing was, you know, was really just about oil. So
right. Yeah, exactly.
It was no point. And I feel like, I know this might be a long shot, but I feel like if that's what it was all about, I feel like, no offense, I feel like if that's what it was all about, I really feel like there would have still been the support for it anyway, because there was no need to be like, oh, like weapons of mass destruction or whatever. Because it's like, if we think about it, America has been we've been like kind of putting ourselves in shit that has nothing to do with us for a long time. It's become kind of like the culture of this country that we live in. But I think for me, it's about the troops and like with the shit that they've had to deal with over there, you know, like PTSD,
right,
being away from their families, all for, and relative, if we're looking in like larger terms, it was relatively for no reason. And it was completely unnecessary. So I think any effort to get troops out of there I can support, because I don't feel like they need to be over there anyway. Yeah,
100% agreed. All right, so moving on, I'm still in the Biden's house. So Biden is pushing for this infrastructure bill. As he mentioned in the previous pod, Manchin wants to reduce the corporate tax rate. Manchin's pretty much a corporate lobbyist. Just go to opensource.com. You can see all his corporate donors if you don't believe me. But basically, the unified Republican messaging on it is basically that it's not real infrastructure because it's expanding outside roads and bridges. Yeah, infrastructure evolves over time. So there's that. Biden's also asking to form a commission. Actually, he's not asking. He created a commission via executive order to study the possibility of expanding the Supreme Court. Now, this is a bipartisan commission, so they're going to be looking into that. It's already gotten some opposition in the Congress. Nancy Pelosi said that she won't bring the bill to the floor, even though the Justice Committee wanted to do it. And I think this is kind of going in because people are pushing Justice Stephen Breyer to resign because he is 82, I want to say. So we just don't want to have like a previous experience where if Biden loses or Kamala Harris loses in 2024, that we lose yet another liberal seat to conservatives. So let me ask the podcast this question. Should the court be expanded?
I'm really torn on this one, to be honest, because I think that in the immediate term, it makes sense to expand it just to get some progressive things done, especially while we control all three houses of Congress and the presidency. It makes sense to do it now. But I just wonder, like, what is that going to mean in the long run when in 2022 Democrats could lose control of Congress, And then in 2024,
Right.
there's a very real possibility that, Biden doesn't win. And do you want to give, the conservative majority an even bigger majority with more court seats, knowing how they acted, this last 4 years? I don't know. It's a risky proposition. I would lean towards not expanding it. But at the same time, it's like, then it's kind of a bet or gamble on, can Democrats build on what they achieved in 2018 and 2020 and kind of build a lead? And I don't know if that's possible right now.
Mm-hmm.
No, I agree with you, Marcus. And I lean no. I don't think we should touch the Supreme Court because my fear is that let's say we do expand it. Let's say we add like 4 additional justices to it. What is stopping? Again, there's no guarantee that Biden wins the re-election. There's no guarantee that Kamala Harris wins if she runs. What is stopping Republicans from doing the exact same thing? Maybe they reduce the court size so that it's all conservative. You know what I mean? So I get kind of worried because I think that if we start playing around with that institution, it could really backfire on us because the way that Congress is heavily skewed towards Republicans.
Right.
So they can easily take over Congress. They might take over in 2022. It's looking that way. They might take over both houses. That's what it looks like.
It's very. it looks very possible, unless it's a shame that Democrats haven't. We'll see what the end of the year looks like if they're able to build on it. But like right now, it's not looking good. Especially there's a lot of backlash towards things that have happened in COVID, and that could drag down Democrats big time in 2022. So,
well, I don't even think it's like what the Democrats are doing. I think it's what they're not doing, which is like we saw like a series of states pass like pretty regressive voting laws.
Yeah, that's so.
So like if you have like suppressive voting laws in place where you're making it harder or adding additional barriers to vote, that is going to benefit Republicans. It just is. Like if you look at Georgia is like really hitting like the urban areas. But if you live in a rural area, it's a lot easier for you to vote. Texas did the same thing with the ballot boxes, right? If you want to drop it off, they want you to reduce it down to like 1 ballot box per county. Harris County is the biggest county population-wise in Texas compared to like some random county in the middle of nowhere. So I think the simple fact that like we're not going to get rid of filibuster and that we're not going to pass like these voting reform bills, I think that's really going to like bite us in the butt like 2022.
No, I can definitely see it going that way, unfortunately. Which is why it kind of makes this court question very interesting. But I'm with you. I kind of lean towards not taking action there. But it's like, then what's the plan? How do you maintain power, and how do you get things done in the next next couple of years?
Right, and that's what kind of scares me a little bit because I want to say part of Democrats faced this question back in the 90s, and their answer was go straight to the middle, sound as Republican as possible. And we got like Bill Clinton, and Bill Clinton, obviously, some people really like the guy. He's a really likable guy, but he did pass laws that benefited us, not so well. So that's what I'm kind of worried about. Here's an example. President Biden and Congress is aiming to extend a Trump era policy, which is going to impose harsher sentencing to people caught with fentanyl, right? So that's the drug that George Floyd was on when he died. And can you imagine like George Floyd spending more time in jail than the person that murdered him?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like it's kind of like a harken back to like the war on drugs, and we know it's a failed policy. I think Manchin is pushing for this. Once again, Manchin, one of his big donors, is a private prison. So
because it's not about. It has nothing to do with like people who like this idea that we care about people who are addicted to drugs is false. Like we don't care about people who are addicted to drugs. Like so,
absolutely not.
So I'm not surprised, like when you phrase it that way, like spending more time in jail than the person who actually gave it to you. Like, or what did you just say?
Like, okay, let's say in a hypothetical scenario, right? Like George Floyd could potentially, if he was still alive, spend more time in jail because he was high on fentanyl than the person that murdered him.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, like we treat like drugs as if it's the worst thing that is affecting the communities of America. Like domestic violence isn't a problem, rape isn't a problem, abuse, murder are not pressing issues that affect and these are things that are not like they affect everyday people. Like everyday people have to deal with these things. Drugs, I get it. Drugs, especially when it gets into the hands of like, the like younger people or just and people get addicted to it. I understand, like, yes, there's a problem with drugs in this country and we have to take a tackle on it, but I think we have to treat drugs and the drug problem as a medical issue, which is what we should have treated it as from the very beginning, instead of a criminal problem, because it's not a criminal problem. People are more like, people just get more sneakier with their drug usage when it's criminalized. It doesn't stop people. Like, the idea that, I could go to jail if I get caught with drugs is not going to deter anybody from doing drugs. It just makes you become a little discreet with how you buy drugs, when you use drugs. So I think the decriminalization of drugs and the legalization of drugs is on the right track, but we have to decriminalize drugs as the next step. It can't just be like legalize drugs. We have to decriminalize it.
It's not even drugging either. Like, it's really just a form of self-medication for a lot of people.
Yes. Right. And it's like, you have to start to acknowledge, why are people using drugs? Like, what is the reason why people are using drugs? And then you might get to the bottom line that it's to escape from the shit that you have to deal with on an everyday basis. And for some people, these are things that if the government cared more about everyday people, they could absolutely fix if they truly wanted to. But it doesn't serve their interest to get rid of drugs, because then what do you have to lock people up for, especially Black and brown people?
Yeah, and I want to go back to what Carly mentioned before. So even people who buy into the whole war on drugs notion that, like, okay, if you give like a harsher punishment, that's going to deter people away from doing it, right? It's the same story at the border. If you give like a harsher punishment, it's going to deter people away. We all know that doesn't work. Yes. And like, what people here in the United States don't quite realize is that when you go to jail, you come out of jail at some point.
It's not going to change anything.
Well, not only that, but our system is not really designed to rehab people. Yeah. Right. Because when you still get out of jail, you're still kind of facing a punishment. You gotta have to go on probation. It's hard for you to rent places. It's hard for you to get a job.
If you wanted to build off that and say, okay, yeah, there should be a punishment for selling drugs. Cool. Why don't you establish drug programs, like a real drug program, not the bullshit drug programs that exist in some prisons nowadays? But it's like, why don't you fixate on fixing the issues within the punishment if you genuinely want to see a change? Because locking people up in cages for a bulk of the day is not doing anything to kind of understand why people go to, because what's going to happen, like you say, they get out of jail and the old habits become anew, because now it's like, I'm out, I'm just going to go back to doing the same shit that I was doing.
Well, there's still opportunity for them. Exactly. I don't think like people want to go back to the life that they were doing, but
no.
Like, if you don't offer them jobs and like they have to carry that around in their record, they can't rent in a place.
What do we hear all the time when it comes to recidivism? Okay, you get out of jail, and then whether you're on parole or not, you're required to get a job, because even if you're on parole or not, or probation or whatever, when you get out in the real world, you have to find a place to live. You have to find a job because you have to support yourself. It's intensified when you have to check in with the parole board, because any little thing, they'll send your ass back to prison. But
exactly,
people, I wholeheartedly believe a lot of people sell drugs, because that's how they support themselves.
Oh, 100%.
So it's like, so if you're not offering them other options, and they're not really getting any sense of like betterment within prison, because I know some people who go to prison and get continued education, like they get their GED or they work on an associate's degree or whatever, cool. They're into programs and stuff, that's fine. But if I'm just locked up for 4 years, I'm not really doing anything with myself, and I get out, I don't have any skills. I don't have any education, really. I'm a felon at this point. So it's like, not everybody's jumping to hire felons. Right. So, what's going to happen? The cycle continues again. And I feel like the people who are the people who make these laws and stuff, who have the power to change this, I think if they just considered the circumstances surrounding a person's choice, and you do something about those factors, then you might find that less people are committing X, Y, and Z.
All right. So producer Yao gave us a 5-minute warning. So I really wanted to ask the podcast a question here, a very serious question. Are we joining the American First Caucus?
At the one for the Anglo-Saxon, restoring Anglo-Saxon values.
Restoring Anglo-Saxon values. Yes.
Wow, wasps are
Yes.
back. Look at that.
Yes.
That's gonna be a pass from me. I don't know about y'all two.
I'm good. I'm good.
I was disappointed that Marjorie Green Taylor, Marjorie Taylor Greene, she was a representative that wanted to push for this. Got a lot of backlash in her party. She's pulling back. No, I think she should have doubled down. I think she should have gotten this thing up and running. Here's the reason why.
Isn't that the same lady that was like, as soon as Biden became president, she was like, I'm filing like papers to get him impeached, like immediately.
Yes. Yeah,
okay.
she's the QAnon congresswoman.
Yes, exactly. That is.
She has like marbles for brains. So
that's being generous.
Yeah.
I think she was onto something here. You know what I mean? It's kind of like that old saying. It's like, would you rather the white guy have like the big Confederate flag on his truck and on his property, or would you rather the white guy that kind of conceals his racism? You know what I mean? So like, I'm all for like, put it out in the open, start this committee. Anyone that joins, we know what you're about.
But do you need a committee for that? Or can you just use your better judgment?
It just makes it easier, because if you use our better judgment, then it's going to be like, oh, everything's about race. Now here, that limits an argument.
It's a caucus though, right? It's a group of people that they're all just going to put their names on these votes, right? And whatever policies they want to put forth, right?
Exactly.
I mean, from that point of view, I guess it's a good idea that now that we know that they're out there. But I mean, we already knew they were out there. Like, I think the people that she's thinking about doing this with are like Louis Gohmert, which I don't think anyone's going to say that he's not a racist if you listen to him.
I think Matt Gaetz wanted to join or sign up for it.
Oh, before he got into this shit.
No, not before. No.
Oh, after.
After.
I forgot Florida man. Yeah, Florida congressman.
He did not resign, so.
It's a good point.
Yeah.
They should totally go for that. I usually don't like empowering racists, but if they're gonna put their name on it, then why not?
Right. If they're gonna be out in the open about it, let them be out in the open about it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. Yeah. Now, like if a Democrat wants to do like a bipartisan bill, we know, hey, don't sign anything with that person, or else we're not voting for you. So.
Yeah, it'll be toxic.
Yeah, producer Yao just hit the group chat saying that he agrees with me. Thank you, Yao.
I like my racist races.
I like my racist races. All right. I think that's all the time we have, right? So all right, this has been a fun podcast. I hope it wasn't too dark. There was a lot of stuff we didn't cover.
Yeah.
A lot of stuff, such as like the UN ambassador, there's calls for her to resign because she said, and I hope you guys are sitting down. This is going to be shocking. So she said that racism is weaved into our founding documents. So I know it's shocking, right? Like our founding fathers were not racist at all.
Breaking news.
Breaking news.
Wow, so, who knew?
But you know what? That doesn't surprise me, because a lot of people, I remember, like, I feel like nowadays, like, people are discovering racism, like, for what it really is, and it's surprising to other people, like, oh my God, how could you not say this? How could you say this? But it's like, we knew. So
we knew. And she's a Black woman. Conservatives want her to resign.
Of course they do.
Biden's not having it. Jen Psaki actually giving a really good like defense for her. Like, you want us to fire a Black woman for saying there's racism? Okay,
yeah,
cool.
I was gonna say she's been really good in the job. Like, we had some real shit ones for Trump, but she's actually come in and she's actually been pretty fun, but also pretty stern. So shouts to her.
Yeah, no, big shout out to her. And then, like, even there's been some like kind of confusion between like the White House messaging. I know the White House kind of backtracked on like there was like this refugee thing where they wanted to maintain the Trump level refugee limits, even though they campaigned on doing the opposite. So she was kind of placed in an awkward spot there, but she handled it pretty well. Even like the stuff in the border, she's been handling that pretty well. So big shout out to Jen. It's definitely refreshing to see like an actual press secretary.
Yeah, she's been great.
All right. I know I said that's all we had. This is I'm being serious this time. This is all we have. There was a lot we didn't cover. We'll talk about it next week. Hopefully Ryan can join us next week. But basically, this has been a fun podcast. If you like it, please, subscribe to it. Please hit us up on Twitter. It's WYE Liberalish on Twitter. Just let us know what you think. Share it with your friends, share it with your family, help us grow this thing. There's just some things that we got wrong. Let us know. Call us out on it. We're not professionals. Shit, I don't care. So definitely thanks for riding with us for this long. We'll see you guys next week. And we're out.
Later.